Welcome to the Rotary Club of Edina, the #1 club in the universe. Yeah, baby! My name is Michael Stanzak, and I am humbled and honored to serve as your 67th president. We have a very... Thank you, I appreciate it. Kudos to Terry Stevens, who came up and he said, you know what you need to do, Michael? I go, what's that? He goes, you just need to be yourself. Just be you. I appreciate that, Terry. Thank you. We have a very interesting meeting planned today with our friend David Schultz. I think this is the third time he's spoken with us, the distinguished professor of political science and legal studies from Hamline University, discussing politics in the media. Thank you all for being here live and in person, and for you Zoomers out there, we so appreciate you as well. Our member spotlight today is on Gerry Norton and his lovely wife Karen, who are celebrating the birth of their grandson Everett James Bloom. Congratulations, Gerry and Karen. Also, congratulations to Joe Arends on your hole-in-one at Minnesota Valley Country Club. Hard to believe it's his 4th one. He says he's a lucky guy. I think he's a very good golfer, personally. Rotary in the news, upcoming events. We have the Rotary Zone Conference, which is taking place in Houston, Texas. Our past district governor, Tom Gump, is leading the charge with that, and our member, Dr. Sita Dash, is a major sponsor for funding that. So if you're free, Chris Major, you're thinking maybe you want to blast off to Houston in September, it's worthwhile. And I know it's a long way off, but the Rotary International Convention is coming up next June in Houston as well, and our very own Joe Hayes will be there for that. Yeah, baby. So for those of you that missed it, there was a story picked up by the Sun Current. It's a very touching story of our 2 Rotarians, Josh Sprague and Susan Stiles, who saved a Guatemalan girl's life. And I get to tell the story. And at the end of the story, I'll have them stand up. So anyway, here's the situation. We were there doing water purification projects, Bridget, and our Toyota minivan had a flat tire, and we rode the back of Ford pickup trucks to go to the aldeas, which are little villages, and we, assembled the water purification things. And then on the way back, at the end of the day, we reunited with our Toyota minivan, and about 20 to 30 yards off to the side, there was this little girl and her family, and they were waving at us. And the little girl had a huge growth on her face. It was the size of a grapefruit or a softball. And immediately Josh and Susan got out of the van, went across the road and started speaking to the family. Susan, as you may or may not know, speaks fluent Spanish, and Josh has a connection with 2 doctors in Escuintla. And so one thing led to another. We got the doctors on the phone. They said, we can help. If you can get her to Escuintla, we'll have somebody look at it. Susan arranged the transportation with the monks that we were staying with at the monastery. So she had the surgery. The tumor was not malignant. She's going to make it. The doctor, Bob, said had she not been brought in, then she would have died within a year from suffocation. So Josh and Susan, would you please stand up and let's give them a round of applause. Talking about changing lives and making a difference, they saved this little girl's life. Birthdays this month. Bill Carter, he's a great bowler. It's his birthday today. Fred, you got your birthday coming up in a couple days. And Peyton Chambers, she has hers coming up as well. August Rotary Anniversaries. Frank Cardarelle, 63 years. I've only been alive for 63 years, and you've been a Rotarian for 63 years. Bob Perkins, Mike Hagan, Ann Platt, 18 years, Gary Pedersen, Jody Kern, Sutton McGraw, Sonia Tingdon, James Platt, Bonnie Sue Rolstad. Bonnie, did you make it today? Oh, she's been a Rotarian for 3 years. What that says is people's appreciation for Rotary and all the good that it does in the world. And then the other thing, it talks about how much we value them continuing to come to our meetings and be Rotarians. It's time, treasure, and talent, and we so appreciate it. Takes a village to put on a meeting. Thank you, Mike Tingham and Tom Reese, for being greeters. Thank you, Gitu, one of our newest members, and Becky for manning the front desk. Thank you, Scott Blake, for being here and doing the Zoom. Thank you, Brad Hepp, for leading us in the Invocation Pledge of Allegiance 4-way test. Les Jones for introducing our guest, Paul Mooty for thanking our speaker, for introducing our speaker. Sorry, David, I screwed up, little faux pas there. How about Don Hutchison for thanking our speaker? And University of Minnesota alumni extraordinaire, Mr. Mark Jessen. Row the boat, baby, taking pictures. Please rise if you're able for the invocation, the Pledge of Allegiance, and four-way test.
Good afternoon. Dear Lord, we ask that your presence be felt by each of us on this beautiful afternoon as we gather today in purpose and in friendship. Make us aware of the deeper significance of our meeting as we develop our friendships as a source of Rotary service radiating from this community to the wider community and the world beyond us. Help us to see those in need and give us the strength and wisdom to serve others as we should. Open our hearts to be sensitive, compassionate, and caring as we work together to serve, to change lives, and reaffirm our commitment to high ethical standards and the Rotary four-way test in all that we do. Amen. Amen. Now the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And of the things we think, say, and do with the four-way test, the first, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. We have several guests here today. And so the members, if you will stand up when I introduce you and have your guests stand up and introduce them. So, and George Lancaster, you have good news even.
So I'd like you to, this is my new bride, Cynthia.
All right.
She was a political science major, and we particularly enjoyed listening to Professor Schultz when he's on Almanac and other places. So when I said you were going to be here, she was real eager to come.
Well, congratulations, too. Mike, you have a guest.
Actually, I have a couple of guests. I have Joe Schwartz, my neighbor, who's a rock star, who's just delightful. He is. And then Ted and Tally, you should stand up. Ted is a young man that's going to be helping me turn around with our PowerPoint presentation. All right. And when I reached out to his mother, Tally, executive headhunter extraordinaire, within a day, she says, I think I have somebody that can help you. And it's her son. Thank you guys so much for being here.
And Bridget, you brought a high school.
Hey everyone.
Hi.
Bridget Hallstrom. I'm excited to have Randy Smazel here from the school board, and he's going to be a new member of ours. So, school district. And we're happy to have him, and so welcome, Randy.
Welcome.
Mr. Murphy, you have a guest?
Scott Swenson, who's a good friend of mine, and I offered to buy him lunch if he gave me a ride, because they aren't like me.
So here you are. Good.
Scott was with Walmart for years, and human relations, and most recently in retail. So,
well, welcome.
Thank you.
Ken Anderson, you have a special guest.
I do. I have a very special guest who she's supposed to stand up, but that's okay. This is my wife, Jean.
Kim Ross.
Hi, I'm Kim Ross. I'm Assistant Governor for Area 3 of District 5950. And for those of you who might not be familiar with areas, Rotary is organized into clubs, and then to areas, and then to districts, and then to zones, and then to countries. So Area 3 has 9 clubs in it, the 2 Eden Prairie clubs, the 2 Edina clubs, Bloomington, Richfield, the Veterans Club, the Eco Club, and the Edina Rotaract Club. So my role as assistant governor is to help the clubs in our area collaborate on projects, which our area has been very active in that way, to bring the leadership together, to brainstorm ideas with each other, and to be a conduit for communication from the district to the clubs, and also help clubs access district resources when needed. So I'm just out visiting clubs, and as I look around the room here, I'm also checking up on this club, because as I see Mr. Murphy here, and Scott Neal, who was poached from Eden Prairie, and, well, of course, Ann Platt, we'll just stop right there. So it's great to see so many familiar faces, and thank you for welcoming me. I'm enjoying being with all you guys in person, so thank you.
Aaron Quinn.
My name is Erin Quinn, and I am actually with a nonprofit called Light of Hope Kenya. We're a home and school for girls over in Africa, and we are currently working on an international grant with the Shakopee Rotary. So I've been out visiting some clubs as well. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. All right, did I miss anybody? Great, welcome all.
If anybody is looking for something to do next Tuesday night and you can help make a difference, go to Edina High School. It's called Band Together. No, our very own St. Paul Peterson will not be playing, but they do have 3 great bands. It's free admission. They're asking for a donation of $20 a family or $5 a student. And the reason that they're doing this is the Edina Public School Mental Health Campaign. And all the funds that are raised are going to go towards bringing an additional Fraser therapist at Valley View Middle School and Southview Middle School. So COVID has impacted a lot of our students. If you're free, if you have the opportunity to go hear some good music and make a contribution, it'd be greatly appreciated. And back by popular demand, talking about music, we have the Traveling Rotarians. Great. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Tom Bach. Thank you, Mike Opitz. I don't know who I've left off. And Marty Cooper. It's great fun. We have some new members of our club, which is so exciting. And Jim, they might not know what the raffle is all about. So instead of you telling them, I'll tell them, okay? So we each get $150 worth of raffle tickets, and we ask you to sell them to your friends, to your family, or in that case, just write a check. First place is $1,000. We have 5 second places of $100, and certainly all the money raised goes to the foundation that we give away to local and international grants. Speaking of which, guess what's coming up? The Gala. Yes, for people out there that don't know that we're having a really fun Let's Dance Gala at the Marriott Southwest, which is by Crosstown and 169. The name of the band is called High and Mighty. They're a 70s, 80s dance band. They're supposed to be a blast. We're going to have all kinds of music. It's going to be lots of fun. Information is going to be coming out soon. I see Kayla out there nodding. Yes, the invites maybe will be going out in a couple weeks. And Dennis Hikes, you're right. I think most of us have been vaccinated, so we don't have to worry about the Delta variant. It's going to be a great time to raise a lot of money. And yes, Bridget, backed by popular demand, are the kings of the road. What fun! So Paul R. Mooty is vice chairman and partner of Faribault Woolen Mill Company. Paul is a born and raised Minnesota and unabashed cake eater. As an Edina graduate from Edina East, he then received his Bachelor in Science from the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota and his JD from the University of Minnesota Law School. Paul's professional career includes working in the tax department of Arthur Anderson and Company and in the private practice of law focusing on closely held businesses. He also served as president and CEO of Custom Rock, a St. Paul-based manufacturer and architectural concrete contractor. As an aside, if you ever want to hear stories about meeting with the gangsters and the union reps in Miami on a hot afternoon, it's a fun story, he can tell you. Paul is also actively involved with a number of business interests, including serving on the board of directors. Paul is a partner and serves as vice chairman of Faribault Woolen Mill Company. Paul served as the president of our club in 2008-2009 and has been a member of its board of directors and foundation boards. He currently serves on the board of Edina Chamber of Commerce, and he has previously served on the boards and board chair of the Edina Community Foundation and the Fairview Southdale Hospital Board of Trustees. Paul and his wife Jean live in Edina and have three children and 3 grandchildren. And an unknown fact is 2 of his grandchildren call him Stinky. Please welcome my friend and fellow Rotarian, Paul Mooty.
It's not just grandchildren. Thanks for that. I appreciate you sharing that. Well, it's my honor and pleasure today to introduce our speaker, David Schultz. This is not David's first time speaking to our club, and he's someone who has been incredibly well received, not only by our club, but all that have had the opportunity to hear him speak. David's resume is impressive, and it would take me the rest of the meeting actually to summarize. He has 7 degrees, from a PhD, law degree, multiple master's degrees, including a master's in astronomy, which I thought was interesting. So if we're looking for the smartest person in the room, we need look no further. David's bio. David Schultz is a Hamline University professor of political science who teaches across a wide range of American political classes, including public policy and administration, campaign and elections, and government ethics. David is also a professor in the Hamline and University of Minnesota Schools of Law, where he teaches election law. David is the author of 30 books and over 100 articles on various aspects of American politics, election law, and the media and politics. And he is regularly interviewed and quoted in local, national, and international media on those subjects by agencies including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, The Economist, and National Public Radio. His bio references his teaching style, which I found very interesting, as well as a quote from David on his philosophy of learning, and I just wanted to share that as well. His teaching style is students taking a class with Professor Schultz will learn to think, analyze, and write about the world of politics. They will be expected to develop cogent arguments backed with appropriate evidence and presented in a clear, concise fashion. And his philosophy of learning, students do not learn by writing and thinking. They learn by rewriting and rethinking, and in bringing creative yet well-reasoned arguments to how they analyze the word politics. So David's here today to talk to us about media and politics, so please welcome David Schultz.
Thank you very much for having me today. And I was actually sort of tasked with 2 assignments. One is to try to talk about the media and politics, which of course means I could keep you here for like the rest of the day. And then someone said, could you also talk about sort of the Derek Chauvin trial, which also could keep me here for the rest of the day. So what I want to do is at least initially talk a little bit about the media and politics and give you a couple of insights or thoughts in terms of that. And then, of course, a couple of things I want to say also about the Derek Chauvin trial and some observations there. And then hopefully the best part is always when I have the opportunity just to field questions and answers from you. That's the most interesting part. You know, I think when at some point someone mentioned I'd been here twice, and Ann and I were talking. I think it's been here more than twice, but I can't remember how many times it's actually been here. But I think one of the times that I was here, or at least maybe a few times, I've talked all about political polarization in America. And in doing that, you know, I've pointed out, you know, that while we're not the most polarized we've ever been in American history, clearly, of course, the Civil War, you know, beats the heck out of anything that we've seen right now. But nonetheless, it's pretty significant. But usually what happens when I start to talk about the issues of political polarization in America, somebody inevitably raises their hand and says, well, where does the media fit in? To what extent does the media or the new media or the social media, and I'll talk about the differences across all those in a few minutes here, where do they fit in? You know, are they polarizing America or are they just reflecting an America that's already polarized? And the argument's going to be it's a little bit of both, you know, that in one sense, you know, they are fueling, they are driving the divisions that we're seeing in our society. But on the other hand, there's a whole bunch of other reasons why we're already polarized. Again, I can come back to those, you know, maybe in questions and answers. But in order to be able for us to think about the media in American politics, you know, a lot of us have sort of this impression that carries over from an earlier era. And I'm going to come back to it in a few minutes here and explain it in more detail. But many of us like to think about the media in American politics in terms of what I call the Walter Cronkite era of American journalism. And what I mean by Walter Cronkite, for those of you who were not around when he was around, Walter Cronkite, you know, who hosted, the evening news for CBS, you know, for many years, you know, was known for sort of his closing line of saying what, and that's the way it is, whatever the date was, et cetera, et cetera. At one point, he was considered to be the single most trusted person in America. American media and American news was considered to be, objective, unbiased. People trusted what they heard. And to a large extent, it lived up to the reputation in terms of what many of us had. That during that Walter Cronkite era, which I'm going to say roughly takes us from approximately, let's say, the 1950s, maybe until the early 1980s, maybe a little bit later, but roughly during that time period, that image sort of held there in terms of the media having all those characteristics. For any of you in the last few years who saw either the movie The Post, you know, which was all about the Washington Post, or I think what was the other one, Spotlight, which was about the Boston Globe. If anybody saw that wonderful movie, all about how the Boston Globe uncovered the sex abuse scandal, you know, there. For my friends who teach over at the Eric Severide School of Journalism, they get weepy-eyed watching those films because that's our image. The image of what? Of the Woodward and Bernsteins. The image of the reporters, you know, basically being, you know, sort of, you know, sinking into something, trying to find out what Nixon knew, what the Catholic Church was hiding, et cetera, et cetera. And what I'm going to eventually argue is a couple of different things here. One is that Walter Cronkite era of American journalism is actually an anomaly. It occupies an incredibly small, brief period of American history, and that for most of American history, we've actually had what? A highly partisan media. Additionally, what I'm going to argue is that there were several forces that produced the Walter Cronkite era, but more importantly, there are several forces that have led to the abandonment of the Walter Cronkite era. And what I'm going to key in on eventually is talking about what the concepts of how both centralization or monopolization of the news media by a fewer and fewer hands of companies, as well as the fragmentation of the media. So both centralization and fragmentation at the same time have really led to sort of the problems that we're seeing in the American media now that helps fuel or reinforce the polarization. but I'm also going to do a little bit of a discussion about the change in journalism ethics. Now, when I do this talk with my students, I get a little hammy at times, you have to, sometimes with your students, kind of act a little bit. I probably won't do as much of the hammy kind of stuff as I did before, but nonetheless, I still might get into a little bit of that, so pardon, I guess, some of the theatrics in the process here. But if we generally think about the media in American politics, again, if I were at the Eric Severide School of Journalism, and I don't have a handkerchief on me right now, I would be that crusty old journalism professor who would take out his handkerchief, and I would just be weepy-eyed in talking about the fact that that the news industry, the press, is the only industry in America that has constitutional protection. We have a guarantee of a free press, that is there. Government shall pass no law abridging freedom of, et cetera, including press. And the reason why I mention this, if we were to go back to like the classics, go back to people like James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, go back to sort of like the classic theories of the importance of a free press. It's all about what? The free press is an essential component of of a democratic society. It's supposed to be there to first provide the information that we need to be able to make informed judgments as citizens. We can't vote, we can't make good choices if we don't have good information in front of us. But also, the classic role, and again, this fits into sort of the spotlight and into the post. It is the job of the media to be the watchdog, to bark and bite, so that if some person high and mighty is doing something bad, somebody is corrupt, if there's something someone's trying to do to get away with something, we expect the media to be there. We expect them to uncover it and to say, aha, it's you, Schultz, who did this, or something like that. Or, if I still wanted to recite lines from a journalism school, the classic line of what the press is supposed to do, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comforted. It's a wonderful line about what they're supposed to do. That's our image. That's the image of the Walter Cronkite era. But what I want to argue is that there are several forces that have really developed over time that have really led to an undermining of what I'm going to call that democratic imperative, or that, so let's say, that imperative, in the First Amendment imperative, whatever I want to call it there. The first thing we should think about here, in terms of what's undermining the ability of the press to do its job, and you'll see where I'm going to be going in a few minutes here, is what I'm going to call sort of the corporate structure of the news ownership in America. And for so long, even though we had companies like, let us say, Westinghouse or NBC or many other companies, large for-profit companies, owning the news. The news was always considered to be a loss leader. News was placed in a separate division, separated out from everything else. They didn't expect the news to make money. It was there because of what? It was the obligations under the FCC, when it was just broadcast stations, to say you must report on news of importance, you must cover public affairs. You had traditionally firewalls set up between the news division and let's say the marketing and sales division, so that you wouldn't have, for example, somebody from marketing kind of nudge, Mark on the whatever, and say, geez, why don't you go cover, our a major supermarket, because they're a major advertiser for us. We tried to build those firewalls in place, and the reason why this is important is that those firewalls were in place until approximately the 1980s, and starting in the 1980s, companies who owned the news services started realizing that there was money to be made in actually doing the news. They were also concerned about the fact that at a time, starting in the 70s and 80s, many people were moving away from watching news, watching other forms of entertainment. I mean, I like to tell people and say, think back in the 1960s. Again, I grew up on the East Coast, so I'll use like the 6:30 news. For us, would be the 5:30 national news here. If you wanted to watch television back in the 1960s, you had a choice. You could watch the news, or you could watch the news. And if you didn't want to watch the news, you could read a newspaper or do something else. But there was a sense in which they didn't feel competition. But once they started investing, a lot of these big corporations, in acquiring news services, they thought, my gosh, we can also use this as a way of what? Generating revenue. So that's going to be the first thing to think about here, is that I'm not against profit. God bless America. Money is good in terms of what we should all be trying to make. But at some point, we have to think about how perhaps that financial corporate imperative started compromising what is going to be covered in the news. Because increasingly what we started seeing news directors do is to say, well, how will this play to our core audience? Or, and I'm not going to quote a local person here, there used to be a reporter here who used to always say to me, for his or her station, I've got to keep this anonymous here, would say, we would only run a story if we could show the angle in terms of how it appealed to our core demographic viewership. If it didn't resonate with them, if we couldn't paint it in a way that played to their interests, we were not going to run that story. And that's pretty important to think about down the line here. So remember, our first function is the democratic imperative about providing the news, the services for a democratic society, being the watchdog. That function, which we all want to have happen, is compromised first by sort of like the corporate for-profit ownership, increasingly as companies have acquired media at once. A second trend is what I call, and it's a term that one of my graduate students and I coined about a generation ago. And it happened when Jesse Ventura was running for governor. And we argued that Jesse Ventura was sort of one of a long line of what we call polytainers, politicians and entertainers at the same time. Isn't that a great word? My graduate student actually came up with it, so I can't claim that credit there. And it was all about how what Jesse Ventura understood so well was that because the media, because the news was competing against other sources, other forms of entertainment, it too would have to adopt entertainment type structures to get us to watch. I mean, think about over time, how many entertainment shows that we watch now sort of have a news format, how the news formats are increasingly what? Soft news, entertainment. It's about who's going to be on The Bachelorette tonight or something like that. So there became this competition. But in the process, what we learned is how the media wants a good story even with politics. It's about what? Merging politics and entertainment. Jesse Ventura understood that. He understood when he was governor how the media fed off of him. Much in the same way that what? Donald Trump, whether you liked him or not, understood that. Understood the fact that what? The media wanted a story, and he provided it every morning with all his Twitter feeds that he did. So it's that entertainment pull. And then finally, we shouldn't forget the fact that what? That major news corporations have their own political interests. We forget about the fact that they have lobbyists in Washington. They are also pushing for their own agendas. And the way I try to describe this to my students is what I try to say is, and just see where I'm going to put this all together now, is that if we think the job of the media, of the news services, I should say, is to purport the objective truth. It is to tell us what we need to know, even if we don't want to hear it, to give us the bad news, on those days we shouldn't. Those other three imperatives, the corporate structure, the polytainment focus, the political imperatives, all come together. And in my class, I would write on the board, and I would say, news service, or the democratic function plus polytainment plus corporate structure plus politics equals what? The definition of news. News is defined by the confluence of those four forces coming together. And what is more important to understand here is how those work and operate together in our environment that we have now. Now, if we were to go back in time to when, let's say, Thomas Jefferson was alive, Benjamin Franklin, the James Madisons of the world. You know what the news media was back then? It was Ben Franklin with a pamphlets, running them off, putting them on a board for people to read. The press as we know it didn't exist back then. The early presses in the early 19th century were partisan presses. Did you ever wonder why we have so many newspapers that have something like what, the Arizona, Republican or something like that, or something Democrat like that? It's because the original newspapers were organs of what? Organs of the local political parties. If I were picking up, I don't know, the local Democratic or Republican newspaper at that point, did I want fair and objective news? No. I picked up the newspaper because what? I wanted my newspaper to beat up on the other side and point out how nasty and scandalous and terrible they were. So we have, our early history is all partisan. Think of it another way. Would we have expected Benjamin Franklin in the pamphlets to give equal and fair time to the British? No, not at all. So our history is in a different direction. It's really not until the emergence of national newspapers, until the emergence of national radio, and eventually broadcast television, that we start to get this kind of sense of what? Of fair, objective, and sort of towards the center. Because why? If they wanted to maximize viewership across the country, they had to what? Play it down the middle to reach the broadest amount of audience possible. That's what happened after World War II, when network television, ABC, NBC, CBS, had the monopoly on news at night. And whether you watch Walter Cronkite or Chet Huntley or all the other names that were out there, and some of you might remember those, they all were pretty darn close in terms of where they were. And the ethics of journalism dictated at that point, and I'm going to come back to it in a second here, that they play it down the center. But starting first in the 70s, when the rise of what? Cable came out, so that's our new media, cable came out, you now could sort of what? Tune in to other people. And what this started to do was to fragment the media market. That people started to figure out that, guess what? I don't just have to pitch down the center, especially now if I want to make money. What I can do, I can segment to market, I can appeal to a small number of people, tell them what they want to hear, and guess what? I can make boatloads of money. And so we started to see all the proliferation of cable news channels, cable news shows, start to what? Fragment the market more and more and more. And so on the one hand, cable started it, but then of course the new media, the social media, of course fragments it even more. The online media all can sort of pitch to different audiences. And so we've seen this incredible fragmentation across the whole range, no longer that centralization, and that fragmentation has meant it what? Possible to pitch stories, to pitch facts, to pitch to our particular types of audiences. When I teach my Intro American Politics class, I ask my students as an assignment, watch network television news for about 2 weeks. Keep track of what stories are being run, what's the headline story, but more importantly, I ask them to make a list of the commercials that you watch. Now, I'm going to clean this up a little bit. I was in North St. Paul High School, and talking about this once. I gave them an assignment before I went there, and someone said to me, I said, what commercials did you see when you watched the national news? And they said, we saw commercials that featured Depends, X-Lax, Viagra, and I can't think of what else it is. And I said, who do you think is watching it? I won't even describe to you what they said. And I said to them, do you think what's being shown on the commercials has any connection to the content of the news? And they said, yeah, it did. So the fragmentation's producing this fragmentation of both news, audience, and what stories are being covered. At the same time, what we're also seeing is an incredible consolidation of the news services and media. Bernard Bagudin, who teaches at UCLA Berkeley, who was, I think, at one point one of the editors of the Washington Post, about 40 years ago, was pulling his hair out in a book, and he lamented the fact that there were only about 50 major news media services in the United States. Now we're down to 6 media services, news services that control 92% of the market. Isn't that incredible? So we've got both the centralization and this fragmentation at the same time. And what I'm trying to get at here, you'll see where I'm going, is what? Is that what is produced as news is a subject to what? Broad populist interests, where the media now says it's not our job to tell people what they're supposed to hear or to give them the objective facts. At the same time, it's supposed to be what? They're saying our job is to reinforce our audience, to make sure that they hear what they want to hear from their perspective they want to hear, because if they don't, they're going to go somewhere else. And so, see the picture I'm painting here? A picture that says that maybe the media, maybe the social media, is now what? Reinforcing the polarization, or it's aggravating it. A few other things I want to mention here, and then talk a little bit about journalism ethics, and I want to say a couple things about Chauvin, and then hopefully have enough time for Q&A here, is that what also has happened when we start to look at this transformation of the media. Just to give you an idea, again, back in the 60s, people were still watching network television news, were still reading newspapers. No one does that now. When I first did my first book on the media and politics in 2000, like about 2005 or so, I pointed out the fact that for people under the age of 40 at that point, in the early 2000s, 45% of those people in that age group got their primary source of news from the opening monologues from Letterman and Leno. That was their source of news. Now we're finding that it's not Letterman and Leno, of course, for obvious reasons, but they're not getting it from traditional news services. They're getting it from these alternatives. Now, this gets me to my other point I want to make about journalism. Again, if I were that weepy-eyed journalism professor at the Severide School, and by the way, I have enormous respect for the Severide School. They're actually very good. And it was, let's say, 40 years ago, and if I were a professor there, or I were what, an editor of a newspaper, I might bark out to Michael, who's the reporter, and say, Michael, go out there, find out what 1 + 1 is. And you would go out there and you would interview a bunch of people, and no matter what they said, you would eventually come out and say, well, a lot of people said a lot of different things, but you know what? 1 + 1 is 2, and that would be the story. Now, put us to the contemporary. It is not the job of journalists now, according to journalism schools, to figure out what the objective truth is, whatever it is. Instead, now the same situation, I bark out to Michael, go find out what 1 + 1 is. You go out and you report back to me in your news story as well. What? Some people say 1 + 1 is 1. Some people say 1 + 1 is 3. That's your story. It's not about reporting the truth. That's an enormous shift in ethics. And all of you who have watched on the news, we've got 2 different answers here. Answer 1 is watch Fox, watch CNN, watch MSNBC. For one of them, for all 3 of them, it's one-sided reporting. Or if you watch the broadcast news, which is still trying to be something objective, it's now what? Some people say 1 + 1 is 1. Some people say 1 + 1 is 3. So the forces that I'm describing you today have twisted how the media operates in such a way that is what? Again, either reinforcing the polarization that we already have in our society for other reasons that are existing, or it's an aggravating factor in terms of enhancing it. Okay. Now, that's what I wanted to say about this. I want to shift very quickly, and leave enough time for questions here about the Derek Chauvin trial. And I'll say right off the bat, it kind of dovetails together. During the trial, I think I must have done about 300 or 400 interviews with national and international media. And I always kid people and say, I've got everybody fooled into thinking I know what I'm talking about. And I happen to be one of those people who actually does teach criminal law and so forth, and sort of commented on it and could do some kind of analysis. Probably the extent of what I want to say here are a couple of different things to sort of think about with the trial here. Is that one of the things that I thought was going to happen, and it's still possible could happen, because remember, Chauvin's appealing, is that I told many reporters along the line that there's a case from the 1960s, Shepard versus Maxwell, that may come back to haunt everybody. Shepard versus Maxwell, for those of you who are older, is all about what? Sam Shepard. It is the fugitive. For those of you who remember that television series in the 60s, great series. Anybody remember when it was what, it was a 1998 movie or something like that? Great movie also. But the original story of Shepard versus Maxwell was a doctor in Ohio who was a socialite, quite prominent, was accused of killing his wife. And the media had declared him guilty in the press. It was so bad that that we had the paper saying he was guilty. We had the judge who was up for election saying, I don't know how any jury could acquit him. We had incredibly intense coverage. In fact, the jurors were not screened, they were not sequestered. The trial was broadcast at that point in loudspeakers out in the street. He was convicted. Eventually, the U.S. Supreme Court, about a decade later, overturned his decision. For those of you who are trivia buffs, who remember a defense attorney named F. Lee Bailey, that was his first big score. His second big score, of course, was what? Patty Hearst. His third one was O.J. Simpson. But I kept telling reporters that be careful about the coverage. Lurking out there is Maxwell versus Shepard. And I said I would not be surprised, given all the pretrial publicity, all the things that happened, the fact that a city council settled during the trial. I said I will not be surprised that it's somewhere along the line, 3 years from now, that Derek Chauvin walks free because they declare that he couldn't have gotten a fair trial. That's my one point. My second point is that Derek Chauvin's conviction, I think, raises an interesting question of which I don't know what the answer is completely, although I have a sense of what it is. Does Derek Chauvin's conviction prove that the system works, or does Derek Chauvin's conviction say that there's more rotten apples in the barrel? That, I think, is the great debate in our society. I think already Derek Chauvin's conviction has basically led to the conclusion that the system has worked, we got the one bad apple, and move on. Now, we can have a great debate about policing in America. We probably still need to do some reforms, but I essentially think, and I argued this about 3 or 4 months ago, that throughout American history, we've had several opportunities, several forks in the road to address race in America, and we haven't always gotten it right. I argued, and I think it's true, perhaps unfortunately, that we are now in a post-George Floyd moment, that the window, the door that was there to do meaningful reform has already closed. Some of that's closed because of missteps that we're seeing in Minneapolis. There's no question about that. But where I sort of want to end this at this point is by throwing it back to you in terms of some sense here for both the Chauvin and about the media here, is that what are we learning about media coverage in America? What are we learning about our capacity to, let's say, do political reform in light of what I've talked about today? And so what I hope, I've generated a few thoughts, a few questions here. Hopefully you've got some beyond what I want to talk about here, but I hope you enjoyed some of the perspective here, and I really invite questions. All right, thank you. All right, so how are we doing this? Are you calling on them or how?
We have lots of time.
Oh, good.
All I ask is that you repeat the question so the people on Zoom can hear it.
I will, so I just want to get my glass of water, though.
Okay.
Some of you, like me, who suffer from allergies this time of year, having this is helpful. And I don't know about you, I pray for, frost. Go ahead, yeah.
Do you believe the mass of our population understands what you just delivered?
No.
I doubt it. I doubt it. I doubt it in terms of it. But what's interesting...
Repeat the question.
I believe that the mass of our population believes what I talked about? And my answer is no. But on one hand, what's fascinating here is on one level I want to say no, on one level they say yes, because the American public is so skeptical about the media right now. So on one hand I want to say yes, but they're only skeptical about the other media.
Right.
My news is right. Everybody else's is wrong at this point. I mean, I was avoiding quoting Daniel Patrick Moynihan until now. His great line that I quote in my classes, where Moynihan once said, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but not to their own facts. But we're really now at that point. And again, I could go into a long discussion of how cognitive psychologists will talk about things like what? Confirmation bias. That we seek out information that supports what we hold, and we discount everything else. Or cognitive dissonance, the same thing. I mean, the media has figured out the psychological forces that make us tick. And it's no surprise. I mean, think about it. I think the smartest people in America are the people on Madison Avenue. The advertisers. They get us to buy stuff that, we don't make. I mean, I think in my lifetime, the absolute genius was the person who made pet rocks. For those who remember that. Taking a little rock with straw and selling it for a ridiculous amount. God bless America, the guy who could figure that out. So on one hand, totally skeptical, but skeptical in one way. All right, go ahead.
If there was true objective media, and that's a separate question if that's even possible, but let's assume there is, would anyone listen? And no. Would, I guess my question is, anyone listen, or would anyone believe it?
That's okay, if we actually had a fair and objective media who was reporting the truth, would anybody listen to it? I don't know if there's a market for truth. And that's the scary part about it right now, too, is that I would want to hope so. I mean, I talk to so many groups that people say they just want to hear it with no BS, and like that. But I really wonder about that sometimes. Would we really want to have that? I mean, what was it now? The other... who was it? Ted Koppel. Ted Koppel, there's a great line of his from Nightline, and he was, and again, this is ancient history now, but Ted Koppel's Nightline, which has already been off the air for a generation, started during the Iran hostage crisis. And Ted Koppel once did an interview, and he said, think about the awful job that I have at night, telling people that we still have American hostages being held and there's no foreseeable change in the future. He said, I don't enjoy giving people bad news. No one wants to watch bad news. No one wants to hear it. And so I want to hope. In some kind of Pollyannish world, I want to hope that there's a market for it out there. But I don't know if there is. And notice the phrase I use, market for it. Because if there actually was a market for it, someone might deliver it. Now, maybe to show my biases in the world, something like that. Okay, people always ask me, well, what do I read or I look at? Okay, my favorite weekly is what? The Economist. I love The Economist. I read the Financial Times. I'm an academic, so I get like academic subscriptions to what? The Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. I clearly don't read all of them every day, but I try to sort of graze the headlines or something like that. But if there truly was a market that was big enough to make money, somebody would probably fill it. Yeah. Go ahead, right there. Yeah, you, of course.
Thank you.
And pardon me for pointing, by the way.
No, that's fine. I was pointing at you.
Okay. I'll point back.
New York Times talks about, and I have a background in journalism, giving voice to the voiceless. What's your thought of that? Because I was trained, my background's journalism, I worked in community newspapers mostly, trained in the 80s and so on. Now, we were trained maybe a different way than nowadays, that you have an angle or more back to the partisan kind of angle again. So giving voice to the voiceless, what are your thoughts on that? That's New York Times.
Yeah. I don't have, okay, what's my thought on the New York Times approach of saying we should be giving a voice to the voiceless? I think we should. I mean, on the one hand, part of the problem, of course, is we have the same talk. I mean, watch CNN, Fox, et cetera, we've got the same talking heads that are out there all the time. And I think you have to give a different perspective. A personal story that I'll tell here is in the sense of, was it in 2016, it was like early May. I was invited to Washington for a conference, sitting at a room full of really, really smart Washington insiders. I don't know how I got invited to this thing. And they're all talking, and somebody starts to talk about how XYZ is going to happen when Hillary Clinton's president. And I kind of stopped, and I looked, and I said, what do you mean when she's going to be president? And they said, oh, she's already got her transition team selected and planning for her transition. She's going to be president. Remember, this is Washington, D.C. And I looked at him, and this group of people, and I said, you know, things look a little bit different in the Midwest than they do in Washington, D.C. And I pointed out by saying, I grew up in New York. I know the Washington, Boston, et al. Corridor. I said, you look in the Midwest, it ain't going to be Hillary Clinton at this point. And in the media, after the election, we're like, oh my gosh, mea culpa. We didn't understand what the rest of the country was thinking about. We got to reach out to other voices. They haven't done it. 4 years. I mean, so as much as they say they want to diversify, get different voices, different faces, which I think is great. We need to have a media, a news service that reflects the diversity of America. But on the other hand, the New York Times gives lip service to it, at best. Yeah. Yeah, right there.
So, in terms of the institutional norms of objectivity breaking down,
Right.
has print newspaper retained it more than TV media? Because when I read the papers, 4 different papers, and then I listen to 4 different broadcasts, I feel like the paper has somehow retained more of that objectivity and ethics than the TV.
Yeah, the question is, has print journalism, especially newspapers, retained more of the objectivity? By a lot of measures, when you look at some studies, the answer is actually yes. You know, that the traditional canons of journalism ethics are still stronger there than they are for, let's say, for television news or social media news. It's actually not bad for broadcast news. When I mean broadcast, ABC, NBC, CBS, you know, the big 3. If you watch them, they're still fairly good, although the news content is low. With them. If you actually look at like the CBS National News or ABC or NBC, by most accounts, if you use hard news versus soft news as a marker, only about 7 minutes is hard news. Very little. It's the rest is human interest like that. But the papers do a much better, or print journalism does a much better job. And I think you're absolutely correct. But again, no one's reading the papers, or at least in hard copy version. And so they're struggling. They're struggling against a tide. And then also, they're struggling by what? Newspapers in the last 20 years have been trying to figure out a business plan to make it work, you know, with online stuff. And some, like the New York Times has figured it out. Wall Street Journal figured it out a long time ago, how to do this. But a lot of them are struggling. And I don't know about you. And again, things that I'm always hoping that I'm wrong on. I'm expecting any time in the next few years, we're going to become a 1 newspaper metropolitan area. I mean, the Pioneer Press is tremendously struggling at this point. It's owned by a hedge fund that's not giving them a lot of resources. Michael, forgot his last name now, who's the editor, wonderful person, you know, but he doesn't have a lot of resources to work with at this point. So again, your intuition, I think, is correct. Yeah, right there.
Do you think nonprofits like MinPost and ProPublica, which is sort of a common cause / journalistic thing, are filling any of the void then in the media today?
Yeah, I actually do. Or do we think that ProPublica and MinPost are filling that role? I think they are. I think they have both figured out how to do, and this may be coming to your question here too, is that I don't know how big that market is, but there is some market out there for something that's sort of straight up and down news, you know, something that's more objective. And they've been able to figure out, at least for now, how to combine foundational support along with like donations. But in some sense, both of them are also operating, the Center of Public Integrity is like that also too. They're operating a little bit on afterburn, because if you look at many of the journalists for those, they're the old guard. A lot of the old guard, certainly not all of them, but a lot of them are the old guard. And I wonder what happens when that old guard basically exits the journalism scene. Are they going to have a new cadre of journalists out there that understand that old approach? And so I just don't know. I also don't know how long that's sustainable. I know after George Floyd's death, we can actually say murder for now, at least after his murdered, a lot of foundations were rapidly switching their giving. And I know MinPost and a couple of others are concerned about the shift in priorities may mean that they get short-shrifted in terms of resources. Yeah, way back there.
David, thanks for coming and talking with us today. I've got really two questions. One is, how are we going to get out of this mess that we seem to be in, where everybody seems to be so polarized? And the second question is, how come nobody's been prosecuted for the Russian hoax and all the rest of the crap that's been going on in D.C.? Why hasn't anybody been prosecuted for that?
Okay, so the two questions here: how did we get out of this mess? Two, why hasn't anybody been prosecuted, surrounding sort of like the Russian, I say infiltration or whatever of our political system? Okay, a couple of thoughts here. Okay, in a different guise, I would come back to all of you and say, in about 10 years, a lot of this polarization subsides. Why? We're going to see one of the greatest transformations of generational shifts in American history. A lot of what's driving America right now is a generational clash, silence, baby boomers, and a new generation coming up. My nice way of saying it is in about 10 years, a couple of generations have exited the political system. We're on the beginning right now. Last election was the first election that I call the first post-baby boom election in American history. Baby boomers are no longer the largest voting bloc in America. Millennials and Gen Z are 37%. What we're going to see with that transformation is sort of an emergence of a new political consensus. Now, whether that consensus is urban liberal or more suburban centrist, I don't know what that answer is. And so one, that's going to happen down the line. Now, the second thing, if we're going to sort of the prosecution, that's actually a really good question here. Why haven't we? Part of it's the division. We've got partisan divides in this country, which strike me as odd over this issue that we should all, I think, be worried about the fact that that we've got foreign countries that are trying to infiltrate, our elections, that are trying to that basically have gotten to our social media and are sowing a lot of problems. So I don't know why. But I want to give another answer too here, is that people have asked me for years also, well, what would you do with all this stuff here? How would I address some of these issues here? There's two things that I would do. Gotta make sure to. Okay. One is that from the 1940s until the 1980s, we had something called the Fairness Doctrine on the books. And it required the media to cover opposing viewpoints. And we got rid of the Fairness Doctrine. It didn't mean that one station covered one thing, it meant another station covered something else. It meant every station had an obligation to provide opposing viewpoints. Imagine what would happen now if Fox or MSNBC were required to carry opposing viewpoints. I think the impact would be dramatic. The second thing, and I am really antiquated on this, okay, I've done a couple of op-eds in national newspapers on this. I do not think there's a constitutional right to lie. Period. The U.S. Supreme Court has largely said that we're going to let, quote, the marketplace of ideas and the people decide truth or not. There's this old court case out there for those people who are lawyers, New York Times versus Sullivan, that says that under certain cases, we can find people guilty, or rather of liable or slander if they just demonstrate a reckless disregard for the truth. I'm actually one of those people who thinks that we ought to invigorate that doctrine and basically say that there's no right to lie. Yeah.
David, this is off topic, but it's a burning question.
Dominion.
UFOs do exist. Okay, yes, okay. Okay. Oh, not that off topic. Okay.
After listening to your bio, how much sleep do you need?
I'm doing better than I used to. The question is, how much sleep do I need? I actually do sleep about 7 hours a night. I'm pretty good. Yeah. Okay, good. Who else? Where am I getting the hook, by the way? It's like he's coming now.
Got one question.
One more? Okay, I need the great question. All right. The burden's on you. It's got to be a great question.
What do you think, or is it too early to say anything about the midterm elections and what you see coming down the pike?
What do I think about the midterm elections at this point? Okay. Statistically and historically, the odds are against the president's party. The only time in recent history that the president's party has gained seats in Congress at midterm elections was 2002, post 9/11. George Bush and the Republicans did well. Odds are, unless something goes in a very different direction, Democrats, I think, are more than likely to lose control of the U.S. House. Normally, I would say probably the Senate, but there are way more Republicans up for election. I'm forgetting what the number is now, up for re-election. But I want to say 2 years, a year and a half, a year from now than there is. And so it's probably an even chance in terms of the Senate. Democrats, I think, probably lose the House at this point. I'm glad you didn't ask about 2024. I need to clear the midterms before I get to that answer. All right, anyhow, thank you very much. Of course.
So, thank you, David, again for joining us and speaking to our group. We're just going to have to schedule this on a regular basis.
You're a wonderful group.
You know, in reading our four-way test, I'm thinking, would we be a bunch of really good candidates as journalists? Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Or would we have no chance in hell of getting a job as a journalist? Rotary is a global network of 1.2 million neighbors, friends, leaders, problem solvers who see a world where people unite, take action to create lasting change across the globe in our communities and in ourselves. From literacy and peace to water and health, Rotarians are always working to better our world, and we stay committed to the end. And in honor of your presentation today, David, we're going to make a donation to My Very Own Bed, which is a local nonprofit, provides beds, new beds to children moving into stable housing. My Very Own Bed gives a new bed, set of sheets, blanket, pillow, mattress, pad, stuffed animal, and a book to children who might otherwise go without. Again, thank you so much.
No problem. That sounds like a great group. Thank you. Oh, good, thank you.
Thank you. Of course.
David, you were great. You were probably the smartest guy in the room, and you were very entertaining and very engaging. And I believe that you too serve to change lives by what you do and how you teach and empower your students. And again, that's our theme this year, is serve to change lives. And the way to do that is by re-engaging with the Rotary Club, John Barnett. So we're looking forward to you maybe helping out with a Gala committee. Caleb Bueller's right over there. If you want to hang stuff, or maybe you want to be an auctioneer. Seriously. The Gala committee is looking for anybody that wants to help them. You know, you think it takes a village to put on a meeting. Try putting on a gala. It's even more. So certainly could use your help. And then the other thing is Camp E, which is coming up for high school juniors and seniors, the 4th through the 6th. You can reach out to Rob Bredding, but we're looking for people to be essay readers. We're looking for people to be small group leaders. We're looking for people to be venture capitalists. Like you, Mark Jessen, you could be a venture capitalist. So please re-engage. Thank you for your time, your effort, your treasure, for being here. Truly are making a difference. To infinity and beyond. Becky left, that's her thing, I like it. So Tuesday night at the high school, the band together, 3 bands. A week from today, we have Terrell Brum from the Boys and Girls Club of the Twin Cities. 2 weeks from today, we have Gene and Katie Pulaski, owners of X-Torch, who appeared on Shark Tank, Brad. Apparently it's really cool, entrepreneurial story. We have the vocational happy hour on Wednesday, August 1st with Jane and Jake Ersman at CW's in Bloomington. September 11th is our 3rd annual car show at the Herberger's parking lot. Saturday the 18th is a walk to Alzheimer's at Target Field. The 2nd, we're all going to dance and have a good time and raise money. And then the 6th is Camp Enterprise. I would like to be known as a person who's concerned about freedom and equality and justice and prosperity for all people. Rosa Parks. Meeting adjourned.